that I'd like to offer, if we could, or speak to, if you don't mind. It's really, the amendment really just speaks to somewhat of a nuance that's contained in the bill. We're attempting to line this language up with language that has been introduced in 38 other states because of the topic itself. And if we make that small change in the bill, which strikes line 10 in the bill that's before you, would basically be the effect of the amendment that would be presented to you. So with that, be glad to answer questions about that.
So, Senator Holman, this amendment then just simply strikes line 10, which reads regarding the commerce and general welfare clauses?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Why don't we deal then, members of the committee, with the amendment first? And are there any questions, Mr. Holman, with regard to the amendment? The amendment only. Okay, I don't see any. What's the will of the committee with regard to the amendment?
I move the amendment.
Is there can we consent on that amendment? Consent. Okay, we have an amended resolution. Senator Holman, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this. I went back in my archive, which is much shorter than some members of the Senate. This same type of legislation or Senate resolution was introduced 5 years ago in the 2011 session. And oddly enough, when I pulled that file out on the weekend, it was Senate Joint Resolution 14 that was filed 5 years ago. And I'm not sure if that's an omen of good or bad fortune or misfortune for the bill itself. I want to applaud the efforts of Senator Long in working with the Mount Vernon Assembly that took place in December 2013 in Mount Vernon, Virginia. It's when a number of states came together to address this issue that felt that we needed to take a look at an Article 5 convention, a convention of state legislators to look at what's going on with the effect of federal government and Congress, and the fact that, just for instance, the national debt, when I presented this bill in 2011, I looked at my notes. The national debt at that time was $14 trillion. Today, just this morning, I pulled up the national debt clock for the United States, and if you can see that, we're at 18 trillion, 865 billion, 63 million, 400 and roughly $50,000 of national debt. I was sitting over here to the side and tried to clock to see what happens in just 1 minute, and nearly $250,000 in debt has accumulated, new debt, in 1 minute. In the time this hearing is going to take place, we're talking about millions of dollars of national debt that's accumulating, and it is out of control. And we see no compunction on the part of Congress to get this thing under control and to deal with it. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, 4 states have adopted this language that we are asking the Indiana legislature to adopt: Florida, Georgia, Alaska, Alabama, and it has been introduced in 38 states. The same identical language. You know the rules of Article 5. We've had this discussion before, but just to brief you, we need 34 applications on the same topic, and our efforts as we work on this at a national level is to present the same identical language to Congress because Article 5 gives us a way to bypass Congress and the system that we have in place. Congress has 2 powers with Article 5. Issue the call and set a date and time, and Congress is out of the picture as far as the rules concerned. No matter what we do with Article 5, it still goes back to the states to ratify, and there would need to be 38 states ratify, which means that 13 states could block anything that we would attempt to do as a convention of states and state legislators to try to bring about an Article 5 movement within our country. As you recall, a couple of years ago, Senator Long authored legislation on behalf of the Assembly of State Legislatures to attempt to set the rules, which we passed, and it was signed into law. That's called the Faithful Delegate Rule, that says that if, in fact, a delegate we send to a convention does, in fact, not vote as he has or she has been instructed to vote, that they actually could face felony charges. Indiana's law for faithful delegate has become a model across the country to set up the rules for how we handle an Article 5 convention. With that, I know for the sake of time, I have lots of other notes to talk about, but for the sake of time, we'll be glad to answer questions. We have a number of people here today that wish to testify, but I'll be glad to answer questions. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time today.
Senator Holdman, thank you for the presentation. Do we have any questions of the committee for Senator Holdman? Okay, seeing none. Thank you. Again, I'll just reiterate my statement before. We want to hear from everybody and what you have to say. To the extent you simply have to say what the previous or a previous speaker had, you'd be happy to say I agree or ditto or whatever you think might want the message you might want to give us, but we want to hear everything but want to move forward as quickly as we can. Troy Surface, the first person I have on my list. Mr. Surface, go ahead.
And thank you very much for your time. And I only take a second. I want to let you know that, as you can see, I'm a volunteer fireman from Warren, Indiana, Henderson County, just south of Fort Wayne. I agree with this resolution totally and the Convention of States. I agree with what he's previously stated. I am a deacon at my church. I have 3 children, 2 of which are here. My daughters Mary and Hannah Surface. Been married for 26 years. I wanted to make a statement. From my favorite Christmas music, we're the kind of people that live and die in this great state. And I think the federal government is extremely out of control. And I think this Article 5 would help us immensely because the federal government has lost connection with the common people. And I thank you for your time, and God bless all you.
Thank you. Wait, there might be some questions for you, Mr. Surface, so hold tight just a minute. Members of the committee, any questions for Mr. Surface? I live down in southern Indiana, but my grandmother grew up in Warren, Indiana, as a matter of fact. So happy to have you here. Thank you.
Outstanding.
Okay, I think we're done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next witness, Mark Meckler.
Mr. Chairman, honorable committee members, my name is Mark Meckler. For the record, it's M-E-C-K-L-E-R. And I am the president of the Convention of States Action, and we are promoting this effort all over the country. Just kind of wanted to give you a feel for what's going on across the rest of the country and Indiana's role in the process. As the senator aptly stated, Indiana has led the process around the country by passing your faithful delegate legislation. A lot of states are following in your footsteps. 38 states will be taking this up in the current legislative session. We've already passed it in 4 states. I was in 34 states last year, and I can tell you the mood in the country is sour. You can see it reflected in the presidential election, but it goes far deeper than the presidential election. People feel that whoever they elect for president, Washington, D.C. will not listen to them, and I think the evidence bears them out. We have structural problems in this country that go far beyond financial. We brought up the financial aspects of this country, but we're losing our religious liberty day by day. We are losing our freedom of speech day by day. The regulatory state is intruding on regular citizens' rights, but beyond that, it's intruding on the rights of the Indiana legislature to govern its own state. So many things that you do here in the Indiana legislature, you do not have the power to act as the people of Indiana would ask you to act. This movement nationally is intended to restore the balance of power between the federal government and the states. The fundamental question asked by this movement is who decides, Washington, D.C. or Indiana? When it comes to problems that Indiana faces, questions that Indianans want to deal with, the fundamental question in America is who decides. I want to be clear, that's not a partisan question. If you poll the American public today, 72% of American citizens say that the federal government is out of control and has run away from the American people. They say, the majority of the American people actually say that the federal government is the greatest threat to their rights and liberties in America today. It's an extraordinary situation we face, and Article 5 is an extraordinary remedy that was given to you, specifically to you sitting here on this panel today. George Mason stood in convention on September 15th, 1787, and he objected to the form of the Constitution because it only gave the federal government the power to propose amendments should the government deem them necessary. And he asked this question of the assembled members of that convention. He asked, are we so naive that we believe that a federal government which has become a tyranny will propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny? And I imagine myself sitting at that convention, I imagine the men assembled laughed. They slapped themselves in the forehead, said, of course not. No tyranny ever restrains itself. And that's where we find ourselves today. Mason, thank God, introduced a resolution, a change in that Constitution, giving you, state legislatures, the authority to act on behalf of their people, specifically to call an Article 5 convention to restrain the tyranny of the federal government. The message to you from over 200 years ago was that this will happen. They understood human nature. They knew that centralized government would run away, and they counted on you, literally. I don't think there's any more important thing that a state legislator can do today than to vote for the Convention of States resolution. It's not because it's something I'm going around the country promoting. It's because without it, the question who decides is invariably answered Washington, D.C. That is not what the people of Indiana want. I can tell you have tens of thousands of volunteers in your state that are sending you emails, that are calling you, that are giving you petitions in support of the Convention of States application. And I am here to support them, to support the grassroots in your state. I hope you'll do the same and support this resolution. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Senator.
In December of 1994, we met in Washington, D.C. to talk about Article 5. And the big discussion at the time was the Runaway Convention. And we've heard that ever since. While I'm a strong proponent of Article 5 for obvious reasons, we started this out with a single purpose, Article 5, of a balanced budget amendment. Where's that at today? Do you know?
My understanding, and it varies depending on who you're talking to, somewhere between, 27 states have passed some form of the balanced budget amendment. Scholars disagree how many of those can be aggregated. As the senator was talking about, the language needs to be identical or very close to identical.
Correct.
Scholars disagree today whether that's somewhere between 21 and 27 aggregable applications.
My concern as I talk to people is they don't mind the singular issue. It's when you get into multiples that they worry, and the language that's here, for instance, all it says is limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government now, period. What is that?
Anything that would reduce the scope, power, and jurisdiction of the federal government may be discussed in convention. It's important to remember what a convention is.
I know
a
what a
convention is just for
convention is.
suggesting amendments.
But I have to go back to my constituents and tell them
Understood.
what boundaries are those delegates going to be discussing.
Boundary under that particular section of the application is anything that would restrict the scope,
Correct.
power, or jurisdiction of the federal government.
Understand. Then on the second part, limit the term of office for its officials and for members of Congress.
Correct.
What are those terms and limits?
Again, those are open for discussion at the convention by the convention delegates. This is intended to be a debating convention. If you specifically
most
state,
of them have been.
absolutely. So if you
We've
specifically
had them
state
before.
what the terms are, then you don't have an open debating
Well,
convention.
I'm a strong proponent of Article 5. I've had a lot of people call me asking me, why are you not supporting the one we have before us? And it's because of the multiples. And where we get into this discussion of the runaway is when it gets into multiples. Why are we not doing singular issues rather than right now with multiples?
Well, first of all, the discussion of the runaway, if one believes in the runaway argument applies to whether you're doing a singular convention or a multiple convention.
Understood.
Because the general argument under the runaway is the delegates won't follow their instructions, they'll run away and do whatever they want. So once you put them in convention, the idea of a runaway applies equally whether you have one or multiple subject matter areas. The reason that we took the multiple approach is we've never had an Article 5 convention called by the states before, and there's a good reason for that. From a political reality perspective, it takes the most muscular political movement in American history to call a convention. It's never been done. It takes a very big tent. It takes millions of activists. I'm not a legal expert, I'm not a political expert, but I am an expert at grassroots activism. I've been doing this all over the country for 6 years. I was in 34 states last year. If you go into a grassroots meeting and you propose a single amendment, say the balanced budget amendment, you'll find 95, 98% support for that.
Sure.
If you put a sheet of paper on the table and ask how many people will work to pass that, it will be a blank sheet of paper at the end of the meeting. When you propose limiting the scope, power, and jurisdiction of the federal government, I can tell you, I'll fill that sheet of paper times 10. The citizens of this country are looking for a solution as big as the problems. And if this were the 1980s, I would say that might be a balanced budget amendment, and that might be enough. But here we are in 2016, and we face a very different reality with our federal government. And the American public says that a balanced budget amendment or any single subject amendment is not enough to fix the problems that ail us. And if we're going to bring millions of people into this movement, which is what it takes, we need a solution as big as the problem. And the only solution that proposes that under Article 5 right now is the Convention of States project.
I understand everything you said, but the question still remained. We had in fact, Indiana, I believe in 1956, was the first state to introduce Article 5 balanced budget amendment. And maybe it was 57, I can't remember which. But nonetheless, we've always been the leaders on Article 5s. But my original question is why we are going from a single issue to multiple issues in this particular resolution.
I believe I answered it, but I'll summarize.
Yes.
There are two primary reasons. One is the problems facing our nation today are very different than they were in 1984. Our religious liberties are under open assault by Congress, by the President, by the Supreme Court. Our rights to free speech are under open assault by Congress and the President and the courts. We no longer face simply a fiscal problem. We certainly are facing a fiscal cliff. That continues, but there are much broader problems. So we are trying to address all of those problems. The second reason is because it takes a mass movement of people to get to a convention. I'm not interested in investing time in a theoretical exercise. We're going to get to convention. And if you want to do that, you have to bring millions of people into the movement. You cannot and will not do that based around the balanced budget amendment alone.
And why do you think that is?
Because the American people understand what I believe to be the reality. It doesn't solve the problems facing the nation. You know, the folks in this room that are in this hearing room today that will testify in favor of this, they're away from their jobs, they're away from their families. They're coming here because they believe what we're proposing is indeed a solution as big as the problem. And I would challenge you, I've traveled all around the country, go to a hearing on single subject Article 5 amendments. You will not have a room full of citizen volunteers like this. And we will not, unequivocally, we will not get to a convention without the grassroots. This is a grassroots movement, plain and simple.
Of the three, you focused in on limiting the power of the federal government. I'm still going back to my main premise. There's nothing to prevent multiple Article 5s. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question, Senator.
The call of the Article 5 convention is not limited to calling just one Article 5 conventions. The states can call multiple Article 5 conventions as they see fit. Is that not correct?
That is correct, yes.
So the thing that most people I talk to, and it centers on all three, is the call of the Article 5 to limit the power and the scope of the federal government. That in and of itself would embody the balanced budget amendment as well.
Theoretically, it could. We put the first section, which specifically proposes fiscal restraints on the federal government,
Right.
to make clear that a balanced budget amendment would be available there. But also, to be fair, Senator Tom Coburn retired from Oklahoma. He's going around the country promoting this because he believes in, for example, imposing GAAP accounting, generally accepted accounting principles, on the federal government, so we get real numbers. So
Yeah.
those are other things that would be available under our fiscal application as well.
Many of the things, and I can't thank you enough for being here. And I appreciate your tolerance for the questions, because many of the questions I've asked you, this is the only forum, because this goes out on the internet. This is one of the best tools we have to inform our citizenry, and I know you're an expert on what you do. And so I appreciate the opportunity to ask you the questions, and I'm delighted to hear your answers. Thank you.
Senator, appreciate it.
Chair, thank you. In respect for time, I've said before that I like the discussion about the Convention of States more, and I like the idea of it actually happening for the very reasons we just discussed in terms of education. But there's still one question that I have that I'd like your response to. It's that when people say, well, we already have the 9th and 10th Amendments, and that is clearly a restriction in the scope of the federal government. So why does writing ditto at the bottom of the same sheet of paper make any difference to the American people?
The difference is Article 5 is what gives you teeth to the 10th Amendment. If you read the 10th Amendment, there is no specifically enumerated enforcement mechanism, and the courts have obliterated the 10th Amendment throughout the decades. So today, the enforcement mechanism for the 10th Amendment given to us by the founders in order to restore the balance that the 10th Amendment intended is specifically Article 5.
So because we have an amendment process and our country's legal climate does migrate over time, you're suggesting this is why having stated it once is not sufficient, even though it really is restating the obvious? Is that?
Well, here's the deal. I mean, what you're referring to, and I think this is a really important distinction, Senator, you're bringing up what I think is one of the most important points in this discussion, which hasn't been talked about today, which is the Constitution itself. And the idea that the Constitution provides for this separation of powers and provides for enumerated powers for the federal government. The problem is the Constitution that we know and love is no longer the operative Constitution in the United States of America. I've heard many people say, well, there's no problem with the Constitution if we would just follow it. But the reality is we do follow it. It's just that it's over 2,000 pages annotated now because of what the Supreme Court has done to it over the last 115 years. So virtually everything, including virtually ignoring the 10th Amendment, has been sanctioned by the United States Supreme Court. If we think that's a problem, and I think most of us would agree that it is, there's only one fix for that provided in the Constitution, and that is that the citizens act according to Article 5. We could see, by the way, historically the founders did this. The Supreme Court grossly overstepped its bounds shortly after the Constitution was ratified, and the founders immediately stepped up and proposed the 11th Amendment to restrict the jurisdiction of the federal courts. They understood that we would have to go to the Constitution and amend the Constitution to restrict overly powerful interpretations of federal court power.
Any other questions for Mr. Meck? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, committee.
David Waters. Mr. Waters? Okay. Vicki Reeskamp?
Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you for letting us speak. My name is Vicki Reeskamp, and I live in your district, Senator Buck, District 21. I've traveled here today to particularly persuade you to listen to me and to listen to others that you represent and vote yes for SJR 14. And I'll address a little bit on your budget. As a former CFO of our family manufacturing firm, I was fully aware of the importance of following budgets and applying budgets and adhering to them, but it seems like both parties in Washington today have abandoned that process. So, however, I know we need a balanced budget, but the American people should also be able to have the opportunity to address other issues, such as tax limitations, limiting terms of justices, and like was just mentioned, the overall bureaucracy, limiting the overall bureaucracy. So my appeal to you all on this committee is to do your constitutional duty to rein in the abusive power of Washington over the people of this country for our future, your future, and the generations to come. Thank you for your time. Is there any questions?
Thank you. Any questions for Mrs. Reeskamp? Seeing none, thank you. Case Faree. Morning, Mr. Faree.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. Thank you for allowing me to share with you my concern regarding our great nation. My name is Case Faree, like you said, and I am a homegrown Hoosier from Grant County. I'm actually a constituent of Senator Holdman, and I am currently studying political science at Indiana Wesleyan University, so I could not be more delighted to be with you all today. At the same time, the reality is that weariness of government often creeps into my heart as I reflect on the state of our country and the seeming disregard of the problems our nation faces. A national debt, as we all know, that was mentioned, that is soaring in the trillions of dollars, with liabilities for social programs raising the amount of financial chaos that my generation and future generations will be given. All branches of government exceeding their roles, their proper roles, and the safety of Americans being threatened. These are only a few of our problems, but our national government believes that they can fix every single one of them. The fact is that some roles of government would be more efficiently carried out at the state level. So I'm here today to ask you, if you were presented with a bold solution to begin to address many of our problems in a timely manner, would you act on behalf of your children and grandchildren? A solution that calls for a convention of states to amend but not rewrite our founding document in order that proper federalism be restored. Will you simply relinquish the responsibility of acting for the good of our nation to a national government that repeatedly fails to get its act together? I am not willing that we as a nation continue on the path we currently follow, but I have hope that America can once again choose to follow the responsible course of action. For this reason, I ask as a fellow American and Hoosier that you lend your wholehearted support to Senate Joint Resolution 14, which applies for a constitutional-based Article 5 Convention of States for the purpose of checking federal encroachment on our lives. May God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Free. Any questions of the committee? Now, I've got a question for you, young man. So you're at Indiana Wesleyan. What year of school are you in?
I'm a sophomore.
And what age does that make you?
I'm 19.
All right, well done. I appreciate you being here, and you did a great job testifying, so we appreciate you being involved in our system.
Thank you very much.
All right, next, Dan Stock.
Thank you, gentlemen, for hearing me today. I am an integrative medicine direct primary care physician from Fishers who lives in Hancock County. And I could bore you with what this has done to my profession, what the federal government has done wielding this power, but instead I'd like to bore you a different way with an explanation of why the Convention of States is needed, which will, I think, address Senator Buck's complaints. And that is simply a basis upon neurology and statistics. If you have a nation of 320 million people who has given absolute power to a group of 560 people, 9 of whom you can have no effect on at all after they get their position, 100 of whom you can only have impact on every 6 years, and 450 who you can have impact on only every 2 years. But in a situation where they have really concentrated the power in a few members of control in that organization, you can guarantee statistically that if the force of government, if its purpose is to create the greatest happiness for this population, a statistical sample having such a small percentage of the population concentrated with complete power guarantees that it will never achieve the greatest happiness of that population. And it will not matter who you elect to those 550 positions. They will automatically, by statistics, not represent the majority of the people. The only way to solve that problem is to remove their power entirely, and not just their budgetary power, because I can tell you, Senator Buck, what will happen has been what's happening all along. When those 550 people want something done, they will keep the budget balanced by simply ordering you at the state level to bankrupt yourselves to meet that end. And the only way you'll be able to escape that trap, is if this group can take that 550 people and tell them no. And tell them no as soon as they can, because that brain up there is only getting input from a very small number of people in that huge population. And it has to react to the information it gets. You could elect Jesus, Joseph, Mary, Buddha, Zoroaster, Muhammad, Mother Teresa, and they will still make the majority of that population very miserable. Changing the tyrant will not change the outcome. And so I hope this group will take that power back from that very small number of people and give it back to the very large number of people at every state legislature across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Talk. Any questions? Guys, let's keep this moving. We appreciate the support, but let's allow us committee to keep working. All right, seeing no questions, Jim Wood.
My name is Jim Wood from Rising Sun, Indiana, and I took time away from work to come up here today to let you know how I feel. I'm a professor emeritus from a college, recently retired, and my job there was to teach young people how to be successful entrepreneurs. And a lot of the things that come out of the federal government just makes that so almost impossible in today's world for that to happen. A lot of young people are not getting their dreams met of owning and running their businesses and being highly successful because of bureaucratic regulations from unelected officials that are driving those guys out of business and driving their costs up tremendously. When I look at the fact that there are anything from food safety laws, which now go, sorry, you can't eat Jane's lasagna anymore because it wasn't prepared in a family in a commercial kitchen at the Wednesday night church meeting is preposterous. When I have people tell me, young people that are looking at going into farming and they're starting out and they're saying, I can no longer sell my eggs to my neighbors because we're no longer compliant with federal regulations, it's preposterous. What I'm hoping to have happen is for you gentlemen to eventually be able to take and be that check on on the fourth branch of government that proposes all these regulations every year. It's time for you guys to be able to have the power to tell them no. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Josh Plew.
Thank you, Chairman, Senators. I'll try to stick to my notes here so that I don't run long for you. I'm from Burlington, Indiana. I work in Tippecanoe County in the insurance industry, and I've never sought public office, and I've never come before this body to testify. However, I stand before you today because the threat that we face as a republic is both urgent and existential. My great-great-grandfather fought in the Civil War, and his grandfather fought in the Revolution. These men knew what it was to have great personal peril. If either of those men stood before us today, they would be ashamed at the state of our union. I speak to you today for my wife, my 3 wonderful children, as a common person who's no longer willing to sit idly by and wait for the inevitable ruin of this nation. For some perspective of how dire the condition has become, when I was born, the national debt was $900 billion. When my oldest daughter was born, it was $8.2 billion. My son, $10.5. My youngest daughter, $14.3, and she's 4 years old. Today, the debt is nearly $19 billion, and by the end of the current president's term, it will be it will be $20 trillion. In my lifetime, that is a 2,100% increase in the federal debt. I am 35 years old. On my daughter's 35th birthday, if this growth curve were to continue, we would have $400 trillion of federal debt. This number is unsustainable. In 1788, at the time of the ratification of the Constitution, the life expectancy in the colonies was about 35 years of age. In the spring of this year, I'll be 35 years old, and 11 sitting members of the U.S. Congress will have took their oath of office before I took my first breath. We must not allow politicians to sit in Washington enriching themselves while bankrupting the people. It absolutely sickens me to know that this country is saddling my children with more debt than they will ever be able to repay. This isn't a Republican or a Democrat problem. It's a Washington, D.C. problem. and the founders of this country that my ancestors stood shoulder to shoulder with gave us the tools to fix these problems on behalf of our children. We don't have to take up arms and risk life and limb like they valiantly did, but the problem that we face is no less dire. This is no time for half measures. We must unite as a state and march forward with like-minded states across the country to save our republic. The problems that we face are complex and urgent. No single amendment will fix the multifaceted dilemmas of this country. The time for bold, selfless solutions is upon us. At no time in the last 50 years has there been an opportunity like the one we have today to convene an Article 5 convention. If we do not rally around SJR 14 in its entirety to stop the federal monstrosity in Washington, my children will not know an America like the one I love and the one my forefathers gave me. I beseech you to look in your heart, think of your children, your grandchildren, my children, and future generations of Americans, and support this bill. Well, God bless you, God bless the state, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Morning. I think it's still morning. Yeah, okay. I'm not going to repeat some of the things that have already been said, but I just want to let you know that I know I've talked to many of you personally, and I know a lot of your constituents have talked to you as well. And just a couple of points that I would like to make. Like you, like some of you, your husbands and fathers, and maybe not grandfathers like me, but I'm concerned about the direction of the country, as a lot of the other people have said. One of the things that I wanted to mention with regard to the debt, and just to kind of put it in perspective, every child born today, today's date, has a bill for $58,600, and it's only going to get worse. As people said, the debt is ever growing, and it's going to be 20 trillion before long. It's almost 19 trillion now. Some of the other concerns I have include some of the unfunded mandates that you folks have to deal with. Consequently, we have to deal with too because of taxation and so forth. People think this is a partisan issue. It's not. It's not a partisan issue. It's an issue that all of us have to deal with, Democrat, Republican, and so forth. We're all complicit in it. We've let things happen, and we need to get things straightened out, and Article 5 Convention of States is one way to do that. As others have said, Senator Holman, 38 other states are in the process of hopefully passing an Article 5 Convention of States. Our neighbors in, this is very interesting, our neighbors in Tennessee, they have 55 sponsors and co-sponsors in the House to get this. So anyway, I feel that we're at a crossroads, Senators. We need to get something done. You can help this by taking a first step to get an Article 5 Convention of States in front of the floor. SJR 14 is very, very important to all of us. So I hope you'll vote for it. I pray that you'll vote for it. And I want you to know that you have strong grassroots support to do so. I know that all of you have probably seen some of the petitions that are around. You will probably see more. So we thank you, we appreciate it, and we hope you'll vote yes. Questions?
Mr. Dearth, any questions for Mr. Dearth? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Diane Gomez.
Good morning. I'm Diane Gomez. I'm a volunteer state director of the Convention of States project here in Indiana, and I'm here to represent the grassroots. And I am going to say ditto because Mark Meckler said most of what I was going to say and much more eloquently than I. But we have people coming out of the woodwork to support us here in Indiana. So far, 10,000 people. And is it okay? We have brought petitions signed by your constituents that we would like to present to you. Is it okay if we bring those up to you now?
Sure.
Yeah. And please take a moment
to look. Are they specifically directed to each senator, or
yes.
They everybody get the same packet?
No, they are your constituents that have signed it. Each one is No, we're. And I'd just like to add that we, the people, have the right to propose amendments at the state level. So please do not obstruct that right. Please vote yes on SJR 14.
Thank you very much. Samuel Trimmin. I may get that incorrect. And I guess it occurred to me, make sure that green light is on. I assume that it is. And I don't have anyone else on the list to testify on the Senate Joint Resolution 14. So you're the last, sir. Unless is there anybody else who wants to, make sure you get a card up to me. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Samuel Trimmer. I'm an 18-year-old high school student from a small town of Carthage, Indiana. I sit before you today representing my generation. This generation has been born and raised in a great country. I would like it to stay that way, not only for this generation, but for the generations to come. This country is burdened by trillions of dollars in debt, debt that will have to be paid by someone. I'm afraid that my generation, or the future generations to come, will have to bear that responsibility. But beyond my fear, I have hope. Hope in a convention of states. The Convention of States is about using our constitutional right under Article 5 to help fix the mess that my generation and future generations would have to clean up. It's using the Constitution to get back to the Constitution. I'm here today because I believe that this Article 5 process will work. I have full confidence that we will get it done as long as we all work together across the nation, including in Indiana, to limit the power of the federal government and take care of the debt problem. I'm here to speak on behalf of the future generation to let you know that we care about the direction this country is headed. I don't like this direction, but the Convention of States can help correct the orientation that we will take. The balance of power is out of order in Washington. The judicial branch is continually taking power from the legislative, and the executive is no better. Congress will not pass a bill that limits its own power, but thankfully Article 5 gives the states that ability. The next generation is counting on the states to help restore a constitutionally falling republic and help restore the balance of power. The national debt and the out of balance of powers is just two examples that is affecting my generation and will continue to do so. There are more reasons than this to have a convention of states, but it would take too long to list them all here. We cannot go back to the past and fix mistakes, but we can choose the path we want to take for our future, the future of our children and grandchildren of America. So, I urge you today, on behalf of my generation and the future generations to come, use Article 5 of the Constitution to make a brighter future for America. I would love to see Indiana be the next state to pass SJR 14, because it's important to me that we give the next generation a country that is free of debt and oppression and full of unity and freedom. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Trimmer? Okay, thank you, sir. Excellent job. Appreciate you being here. Senator Holman to close.
Very briefly, if I may, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time. I know we've gone long. I think the thing that's impressed me the most, I have only been out there trying to do the best I can on this. These folks that have been here today, I have not made one phone call to get anybody here. As a matter of fact, they asked me who on the committee was going to vote for this, and I told them they had to find out for themselves. I wasn't going to do any work for them, and they did that. And I'm proud of the fact. And I think the thing that gives us the most hope are the two young men that came and spoke to us today, Mr. Chairman. What an impressive generation we've got ahead of us. And for their sake, I ask for your support of this legislation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator Holman. Any discussion from the committee? Senator Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Holman, if we hadn't talked about it, if you can put me on that bill, I'd love to go on there. You know, our founding fathers were a group of exceptionally wise individuals. These guys have thought of every context that could come up in our government, and they made allowance for it in our Constitution so we could govern ourselves. This Article 5, I mean, someone back then knew a government would be too strong and too oppressive that we couldn't do things necessarily through an election. And they gave us a way to get around it. That Article 5 subject matter, because they thought having more would be a problem, they would have put it in there, and they chose not to. And I can tell you, you know, having the balanced budget, the Commerce Clause, when I went to law school, I did not realize that I was not free. Because under the Commerce Clause, they run every aspect of our lives, and we really have no say-so over it. You cannot grow a tomato in your backyard unless the government allows you to do it. A tomato, an ear of corn, because that affects commerce. Because when you grow that tomato plant or that corn plant, you're not buying something on the market. And to think a government's that strong, that powerful, that I can't grow my own food, that's why we need to change it. And I hear, Senator Buck, I hear all the time, I hear from other Republican caucus members, well, they're afraid that's going to happen. What we need to do is just do the Constitution. They're not doing the Constitution. That's the problem. No one we sit up there does what the Constitution says. It's about time we take things in our own hands and change it. And this is the way to do it. I'm all in favor of it. The way we're going now is just like the definition of insanity. Saying the same thing, doing the same thing, thinking it's going to change, and it never changes. Let's change it. It starts with, is this 14? Number 14. And I would be more than happy to move the bill when it's appropriate.
Senator Miller.
I'll echo Senator Young's thoughts. If you could please add me to the bill. And folks have a concern about potential runaway convention. I don't know what the odds are of that, but I can tell you if we do nothing, the odds of us going over the cliff are 100%. I'll take my odds with this bill. Thank you.
Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I stood outside and I was listening to some of the testimony. And first of all, the two young people who spoke, you guys did a great job, by the way. Whoever your parents are, raised some good young men. And I want to emphasize that because as a young person, I think it's important for us all to understand that what we do today has an effect on your lives later on. Everything that we do. What is tough for me is to see the amount of concern about our national debt and other matters of the federal government. I did a little fact checking, and for those of you who are, and I've heard national debt come up over and over and over again. I don't know if you've seen, but our national debt has gone down for the last several years. Now, there might be people who disagree with that, or you could agree or disagree, sir, but the bottom line is this. I love it when we say the government should not overreach and effectively change the voice of the people. But I think if we're going to make those statements, we ought to practice the same thing. Okay? I have sat here as a member of the delegation of Marion County for several years, and I've watched legislators make changes to my county based on what they feel is best. But nobody was here calling for a convention for that. Took away at-large members, took away power from my mayor. Just totally trounced on the voices of the people. And we all know why when we sit on this committee. And I keep saying it over and over again, that's not what we're here for. We take away the rights from home rule. People want to tell local communities whether or not they can have an ordinance to protect the rights of all people. Where are we going to have a convention on that? Where is it going to stop state legislators from trouncing on locals? So while we're here talking about the convention and the federal government, be very careful, because the state legislature could do the same thing to you and your local community.
Any other discussion? All right, what's the will of the committee? There's a motion and a second. Andy, please call the roll, as amended.
Senator Taylor. Senator Randolph. Senator Pete Miller.
Aye.
Senator Alting. Senator Young.
USA. Yes.
Senator Walker.
May I explain my vote? Just at the risk of grandstanding, I think this room will appreciate that prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established shall not be changed for light and transient causes, and I think you know where that comes from. So I think that we can exercise prudence and continue this conversation. I vote yes.
Senator Head.
Yes.
Senator Buck.
Explain my vote, please. The country was founded on grassroots, and I found this topic to be extremely fascinating, if not crucial. The front row is changed by one seat. I see a new person sitting there. But I want to let you know how much I appreciate grassroots. No one in this room is a more advocate of Article 5 than I am. Part of the reason I'm here is because of the way I've seen government intrude in our lives. I had talked to Senator Holman about this and expressed my concern about multiples in the call. I still have that concern, and I've expressed that to the individual here that I know labored long and hard and will continue to do so. My only question and charge to those of you that are here, you've demonstrated a grassroots effort to see to it that we as citizens have a say and control over our government. I will applaud that till the day I die. But with that charge comes a responsibility not to just see this pass, but to see to it that those that are selected to preside over it adhere to your will and not let it become a farce or something that doesn't have a chance of passing and then brought to the states for final ratification. Knowing you're here and knowing what I've just charged you with, I'll support it and vote aye.
Senator Bray.
Yes. Resolution 14, Senate Joint Resolution 14 passes 6-1. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Senator Holdman.